great. Thank you. So thanks, Assad, for that introduction. Very generous as usual. And it's a pleasure to be here with you students and graduates also. First of all, who can translate this license plate for me? What does the license plate mean? Yeah. Huh? Yeah, it's a volunteer zero emission vehicle, right? Okay, that's my license plate. So the car's out in the dark. Anyway, so what I'm going to talk about today is a very important aspect of the transition to electric vehicles. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. And focus on the role of infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and what do we know about that and what do we not know about it. So here's the plan of my talk. First, a little brief review. Why are we doing this? And some review of the status of electric vehicles in the US and around the world. Then begin to talk about the importance of charging infrastructure to achieving the goals that have been set, which I'll show in a moment. And then what do we know about this? What do we know about how much we need, how people use it, how important is it to them when they're thinking about buying an electric vehicle? And finally, what additional research is really needed before we can do a really good job of putting infrastructure out. So maybe this is a little hard to read, but these are the kinds of goals that have been set. The President of the United States says we should get to 50% of passenger cars and light trucks being battery electric vehicles by 2030. Today, we're about 3 to 4%. So that's a long way to go. California is even more ambitious. California consistently leads the country in clean vehicles. And they say, we're going to, ban. Is the connection bad? Ban internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. So less than 15 years from now, nobody in California can, unless that's his executive order anyway, nobody in California can buy a internal combustion engine vehicle. And most interesting of all, I think, is the fact that the automobile manufacturers are on board with this. So Ford, GM, Stellantis, at the time the president announced his plan, said, we want to see 40 to 50% of our vehicles being battery or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles by 2030. Yeah. Okay, hopefully this will continue to work. And the other manufacturers say similar things. There's a quote here from Honda, but Nissan, BMW, all pretty much on the same page, all around the world. So why are we doing this? Well, the recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that climate is already, human greenhouse gas emissions have already changed the climate, that the surface temperature is going to continue increasing with more droughts, more extreme weather events, more sea level rise, and that if we don't act quickly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to essentially zero by 2050, that we run the risk of a very severe climate change, and not just for ourselves, but for future generations. This is from the IPCC report. On this side, you see their black screen. No, the projections of climate change, the projections of greenhouse gas emissions. Is it this or this? All right, anyway, so these projections show different trajectories for greenhouse gas emissions for the world. This shows the kind of temperature change expected. So unless we're able to get to these two low ones, we're going to have more than 2 degrees centigrade increase in temperature. We already have a 1 degree centigrade increase in temperature. And 2 degrees, well, that doesn't sound much, but if we go beyond that, it means 15 to 20 times as many heat and cold waves in the world, more droughts, twice as much flooding, sea level rise by at least 1 meter by the end of the century. And the sea level rise has a huge lag in it. So if we go out 3 centuries, 20 to 2300, possibly 15 meters of sea level rise. So 15 meters of sea level rise, for example, would mean most of Florida would be underwater. And the problem is, once you generate that change, you can't fix it except by extracting the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, which is very difficult and expensive. So in order to not have that happen, will require massive changes in the world energy system. By 2030, multiplying the amount of renewable energy producing electricity by a factor of 4, and for our subject today, almost a 20-fold increase in the number of electric vehicles that we have in the world, and improving energy efficiency of the entire economy as well. Okay, again, more review here, I think, but transportation is a big deal. In the United States, transportation is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the economy, having surpassed electric utilities and generation of electricity several years ago. And almost all of that is carbon dioxide emissions from combustion of petroleum fuels in internal combustion engine vehicles. And that's what we're talking about getting rid of. Of those vehicles, the majority of the emissions come from light duty vehicles, passenger cars and light trucks. When you throw in the heavy trucks, you're over 80% of the sector's greenhouse gas emissions. So we're focusing on this piece here today, changing that by 2050 to 0 emissions. So here's some good news. The cost of the technologies to achieve this have come dramatically down in the past decade and a half. This graph shows the cost of batteries for battery electric vehicles in dollars per kilowatt hour. And you can see that the costs have come down by more than an order of magnitude. So 10 years ago, about $1,000 per kilowatt hour for a battery electric vehicle battery. And now it's maybe $130 or so. So if you think that a vehicle with a range of even 150 miles, which now is a short range battery electric vehicle, 32 kilowatt hours, that would be here, $30,000 just for the battery. But now, maybe just $4,000. So it's expected that cost of batteries will continue to fall below $100, and that will begin to make them competitive with the price of internal combustion engine vehicles. This study by the National Academies, well, actually, I was on the committee, but we showed that by 2030, almost any range of battery electric vehicle is likely to be as cheap or cheaper than a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle. But not so today. Still, they're thousands of dollars more expensive.
David, is this economies of scale or massive changes in technology?
It's no longer massive changes in technology. We've had the massive changes in technology. We're mostly talking about refinements and scale economies and learning, some learning by doing, but basically scale economies and continued refinement of the chemistry, essentially, of the lithium ion batteries.
Is there hope for the future of new transformative technology that would be on the order of lithium ion replacing lead acid?
Yeah, actually, there are 2 major technological breakthroughs, if you will, that are being actively pursued. One is the solid state lithium ion battery. So the advantage of a solid state lithium ion battery is a much faster recharge. That's the main advantage. There are other advantages, better energy density being one of them. But you could recharge 250, 300-mile range electric vehicle with a solid state battery in about 10 minutes. So now this is like refueling your car. You drive up, you charge it, go to the restroom or go buy a cup of coffee, get back in your car and go. That's a big deal because now most vehicles charging with, I'll come to this later, DC fast chargers will take about 50 minutes to charge 250 miles or so. So that's a longer time. You can't just say, I'm just going to charge, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee and then get back in my car. You have to wait. You have to get a latte or something. Anyway, so I also showed fuel cells here. Fuel cells are behind the curve, if you will, for other reasons, and that's a different talk. But so that's the first piece of good news, is that we are about to have cost competitive zero emission vehicle technology. We think. It's not exactly a done deal. The other part of this is that we're just talking about today the infrastructure to deliver electricity into the vehicle and to achieve, near zero emissions total economy by 2050. You have to affect all of the supply chain for producing electricity. You have to decarbonize all of the electricity grid and all of the processes for making vehicles and disposing of vehicles at end of life. All of that has to be done. We're just talking about this today. And sometimes people write papers and they say, oh, well, battery electric vehicles aren't so great because electricity is made from coal and natural gas and nuclear and solar and wind. And these still have greenhouse gas and pollution. That's true today. But if we're serious about doing this and we have to transform the whole economy, and if we transform the whole economy, then a critical piece of that is the zero emission vehicle, which battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell. So here's another piece of good news. The technology for wind and solar generation of electricity is now cheaper than building a new facility to produce electricity by wind or solar is now cheaper than building a new facility to produce electricity with coal or even natural gas. There's a little bit of overlap here with wind. So those technologies have progressed extremely well. And that's the good news. Okay, so where is the electric vehicle market today? On the left here, we see the world stock of plug-in electric vehicles, which now exceeds 10 million, not counting electric bicycles, which Chris can tell you how many, there are many more electric bicycles than there are electric cars. But just focusing on the cars and light trucks and heavy vehicles, over 10 million. The sales are increasing rapidly, as you can see on the right hand, even last year with the pandemic, tremendous increase in the sales. The biggest markets are China and Europe rather than the United States. Now, coming to our subject for today, the companies that make electric vehicles, make electric vehicle infrastructure and supply batteries and components for electric vehicles are part of this EV 100 survey. They think the biggest barrier to the success of electric vehicles in the marketplace is the lack of charging infrastructure. I'm not sure that's correct, but that's what they think. And it's an important part of it. Other things, I think this is the most important factor today, but this is certainly way up there. And that's their view. This is another thing that holds the market back in the short run, is that not every manufacturer has an electric vehicle for every kind of vehicle they make. So when you go and you want to buy an electric pickup truck, big electric pickup truck, let's say, you can buy the Ford F-150, and that's about it. Well, Rivian also. But the lack of diversity of choice, for those who are interested in vehicle choice modeling, the lack of diversity of choice is a big deal. Okay, so what do we mean by chargers? I know for some people this is pretty elementary stuff, but it's a good idea to have all of this in mind as we go forward. So you could charge a vehicle at almost any rate you want, almost, not quite. But usually they categorize the chargers into 3 categories. Level 1 is basically plug your vehicle into a wall outlet, 120 volts. And a good metric, I like this metric for describing how fast you charge your car, it's miles per hour. So you get 5 miles per hour out of the wall socket. If you buy a level 2 charger, which uses 240 volts, that's the same as the voltage for a home dryer, for example, available in almost all households. 240 volts gives 25 miles an hour. So again, if you have a car with a 250-mile range, you could charge it from 0 in about 10 hours at that rate. But nobody ever takes their electric car down to 0 anyway. So. And then you have level 3, which is also called DC fast charging, because instead of using alternating current, you use direct current for charging the vehicle. And so that makes it more expensive, plus the higher voltage makes it more expensive. But you do get about 100 miles an hour. And then there's even faster or supercharging, and now you're up to more than 100, usually about 200 miles an hour for charging. But still, if you're driving a long trip and you want to go 500 miles, you're going to have to stop twice at least to charge. And that costs you a couple hours extra for your trip. Oh, I forgot to mention, obviously the capital cost goes up substantially with the fast charging equipment. So level 1, really nothing, all you need is an outlet. When you go up to level 4, well over $100,000 for the equipment. Now, what that means in the capital cost is that utilization of the charging equipment matters a lot in terms of the profitability or cost competitiveness of the technology. So in terms of all of these levels above level 1, you need to get up to utilization rates of about 25% or more before you really become a cost competitive way of providing energy. Let's think of 40 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, that translates into about 10 cents a mile for energy, which is about what it costs you for a car. If you have a $3 a gallon gasoline and 30 miles a gallon, 10 cents a mile, right? So you need to get down to about 40 cents to be costing about the same as gasoline, okay? And this comes down very quickly, which means that where we are today with about 3% of sales being battery electric vehicles, about 1% of vehicles on the road being battery electric vehicles, most of the time we're up in here. Way underutilization of the charging equipment. But on the other hand, if people don't see the charging equipment out there, opportunity to charge, they don't want to buy the vehicle. So you have a period to go through where this is not cost competitive. But in the long run, it could be easily cost competitive, except for home charging. Now, here in East Tennessee, we pay 9 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. My Kia Niro, which is in the parking lot out here, I get about 4.5 miles per kilowatt hour in nice weather like this. We'll come to the freezing weather and stuff later. But anyway, so that's 2 cents a mile as opposed to 10 cents a mile for gasoline. So this is extremely cost-effective way to provide energy to your car's home charging. Just keep that in mind as we go forward and talk about charging equipment and where people want to charge and what kind of charging equipment they want. So when we look around the world at what kind of charging equipment is being installed, we see that different countries have a different idea about what kind of charging equipment should be installed. For example, in China, which is the teal or whatever color that is, we see that there's almost as many DC fast chargers being installed in China as level 2 and slow chargers. Okay. But in the United States, in the EU and other parts of the world, there are many times more slow chargers than fast chargers. So who's right? We don't know. But it shows that there's a difference of opinion and people are trying different ways to do this. Recall that these cost over $100,000. The fast chargers cost over $100,000. These cost maybe $1,000, $2,000. So there's a big difference in cost and strategy and difference of opinion in the nations of the world. Of course, California leads in chargers in the US, as well as in the number of vehicles. About almost half of the plug-in electric vehicles in the US are in California. Why? Because they have supporting policies, strong supporting policies, especially the zero-emission vehicle mandate, which says if you want to sell cars in California, you have to sell so many plug-in electric vehicles, and then it increases year after year. And that policy really has not only driven the sales in California, but it's driven technology development around the world for the past 20 years. See, in Tennessee, we have no zero-emission vehicle standard, right? Yeah. So anyone who buys an electric vehicle is automatically a Tennessee volunteer. And that's the point of one claim. But good question. Okay, so you know, the Department of Energy maintains a website, as do other people, on where the chargers in the country are and that sort of thing, what kind of chargers. And this shows the publicly available chargers, just the DC fast chargers for the United States of America. There are a little over 4,000 of them. This compares to, well, they're, depending on what statistics you look at, 110 to 130,000 gasoline stations, each with about 6 to 10 pumps. So this is 44,000 DC fast chargers with about twice as many plugs, about two plugs per DC fast charger. And you'll notice something about this. There's some missing pieces. This doesn't look like a well-designed national network. And this does not include Tesla. Tesla has deployed their own chargers. That's, of course, the highest selling battery electric vehicle in the US by far. And I'll show you theirs in a moment. But this is not Tesla, this is others. There's a lot of others. A large number of these recently have been installed by Electrify America, which is a company set up by Volkswagen to spend the $2 billion that they had to spend because they cheated on their diesel emissions tests. But you know, give them credit, they're putting it to good use. They're deploying charging infrastructure for zero emission vehicles. It used to be that unless you had a Tesla, and unless you had a 200-mile range or more vehicle, you could not drive from here to Nashville, electric vehicle. But now you can, thanks to Electrify America. In Cookeville, there's a charging station, DC fast charging, that they put there. But it's a little bit haphazard. It's them, it's different companies. I'll come to that in a moment, show you a chart of the different players in this field. But there's no unified plan, let's say. Now we look at Tesla, and you can sort of see how this was designed by someone who wanted to make sure that anybody who bought a Tesla could drive anywhere they want in the country, get across the country back. Even though there are many fewer chargers, the distribution is such that you can get more places. And Tesla is planning on tripling the number of chargers over the next few years. So they're putting in their own network. The problem is, others, if you don't own a Tesla, you can't use these chargers. So they're no use to you. And that's obviously not from a societal perspective, the best way to use the infrastructure, but it works for them. Now, this is the closest thing we have to a national plan, which is not a national plan. The Department of Transportation designates pieces of highway segments, alternative fuel corridors. And it provides some grants and subsidies to people who are willing to put in any kind of alternative fuel infrastructure, including electric vehicles. But you can see there are only pieces of it. Everything that's tan is not really there now. It's planned. And it sort of suggests that maybe the way we should go with this is something akin to the interstate highway system or the federal aid highway system, where standards are set and requirements in place to have charging infrastructure on a network that spans the entire country, but we're not there. Okay, so I said, who are the players here? Well, there are companies that make charging equipment. They have an interest, and some of them put out chargers. There are places like Walmart that want to attract customers or polish their green image, and will put in chargers at their place to bring in traffic to their business. Auto original equipment manufacturers, what they mean by OEMs, but obviously Tesla is the prime example of that. They put in a whole national network just to support their vehicles and sell vehicles. Public utilities have a role here because they want to sell electricity. And so the more electric vehicles out there, the more electric vehicles they're going to sell. Even here in Knoxville, the KUB was subsidizing home charging to help people switch to electric vehicles. And then governments, mostly local governments, will also put out electric vehicle charging equipment to help promote electric vehicles in their locality. But this is not an overall grand plan that covers the whole country and then maximizes the probability of buying an electric vehicle. So now, where are we going to put these chargers? Well, the first thing to look at is where people in fact do charge. And not surprisingly, most of the people charge at home most of the time. Why? It's convenient and it's cheap. Your car is going to sit in the garage overnight. So if it takes 5 hours to charge it, you don't care. And at 2 cents a mile, it's a steal. It's more expensive than that in California and other places, but still it's a bargain. Okay, secondarily, people charge at work. But what we know about this work charging is most of these people charging at work are getting free electricity from their employer. They're not being charged. If the employer charges them for charging, they go back to charging at home, where it's cheaper. Because if you charge and pay for the charging equipment, all the maintenance, so on and so forth, it's more expensive than charging at home. And then there's a certain amount of public charging going on. And that's really what we're talking about, is what should this be? And what should this be? But this matters too, because there are a lot of households in the country who do not have a parking space that they control, put it that way. They don't have a garage, or we'll come to that in a second. So this is where do the people who own BEVs charge? And not surprisingly, most of them own their own homes, most of them live in a single family home. Most of them have their own garage they can use for charging, or they have a driveway they can charge. Very few of them are parking on the street or parking in a parking garage. Why? Because that makes it difficult for them to charge overnight. They can't really depend on it. And these are the early adopters. These are the enthusiasts, okay? So the rest of the population, I think, when it comes to saying, you live in an apartment building, you don't have your own parking space, you don't own the charger, would you like to buy an electric vehicle? They'll say, why should I? Because I don't know if I can charge it all the time. You can't charge it regularly and conveniently at home. The utility goes down a lot, as we'll see in a moment. So something like 30 to 40% of the households in the United States do not have a parking space that they control. They have on-street parking, or they live in apartment buildings and they may or may not have a parking space associated with that. And if you're saying, I want to get to a 50% share of new sales by 2030, not even 9 years from now, and 30 to 40% of the public does not have a home place to charge, you're really almost saying, I'm going to get to a 70, 80% share of the people who do have a convenient place to charge. So this makes things a lot more difficult and suggests that a very high priority, if we want to meet these goals, should be given to figuring out how to enable people who live in apartment buildings and off-street, don't have off-street parking and so on, to have a controlled space where they can charge their vehicles regularly and dependably. That should. Okay, so there are lots of people who have done studies. Well, I shouldn't say lots, at least half a dozen studies of how much charging infrastructure do we need, when do we need it, where should we put it, and so on. This is from the most recent study by the International Council on Clean Transportation. Looking ahead to 2030, first let me point out that when these people do these studies, they say, first, let's assume how many electric vehicles will be sold over time, right? So there's no dynamic modeling, there's no feedback between infrastructure and sales of vehicles. They say, just assume these many vehicles, now how many chargers do they need? Okay. That's the way they think about it. Why? Because it's too complicated to do it the other way. So there's a research project we'll come to in the future. But they're saying, look, we need a lot of workplace charging. Really? We need a lot of public level 2 charging. Well, public level 2 charging is 25 miles an hour. You know, to get 25 miles in an hour, how effective is that going to be? And we need a certain amount of DC fast charging, so you can get from one city to the next. Yeah, I'm not so sure about this. I mean, given the convenience and the cheap cost of home charging, are people really going to charge at their workplace? I think is a question. And do we really want to put the charging there? The same study says that over time, as we go forward, there's going to be a decrease in home charging. More and more people are going to charge at their workplace or in public or DC fast charging. I'm not so sure. I think they may be extrapolating from the behavior of early adopters who are not typical of the general population. These kinds of estimates miss the fact that there are important feedbacks between the charging infrastructure and the sales of vehicles. So if the charging infrastructure is not there, or if the charging infrastructure is in the wrong place, or if the charging infrastructure is the wrong kind, you won't generate the maximum number of sales of electric vehicles. And you really need to do that because we want to get from 3% to 50% in about 8 years. So there's been a little bit of research done trying to integrate the deployment of charging infrastructure with sales of EVs. And we do this the way you would think. We have a model of supply of infrastructure. We have a model of vehicle choice, right? And I would say this research, which I'm personally involved in, is just beginning to get to the point. It's really not adequate at this point. There are too many problems with it, which I can discuss later, but basically it's the feedback mechanisms. It's the dynamics of it that's really hard to do. one of the problems, for example, is that people are unfamiliar with battery electric vehicles. So a colleague I won't name said to me today, well, we're thinking of buying an electric vehicle, but you know, I drive all over town, I take the kids here and there, I do this and that, and I'm not sure electric vehicle would work for me. I thought, well, if that's all you do, it'll work beautifully. Because people don't realize that almost, let me put it this way, people don't realize that most of the time they don't go anywhere. In other words, they drive to work, they drive home, they drive to the grocery store, they drive to here, there, they go see somebody. It's all within, 30 miles of their home base or so. And when you look at the distribution of trip lengths, which we will in a moment, the vast majority of driving can be accomplished with a very small range. Yeah.
Did you consider other moves like connected vehicles or automated and how that would impact personal business?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. In this study that I'm talking about, we did not. I'm going to talk about, we did not consider other modes. And one of the things I think that makes the future very uncertain in all areas of personal transportation is the potential for automated vehicles, right? So if we really have automated vehicles, how's that going to change? Change it a lot, but we really don't know exactly how. Maybe Professor Kathak knows, but I don't know. Anyway, so the only point of this little diagram here is there are a lot of moving pieces, if you will, to the determination of how important charging infrastructure is to the current owner or potential buyer of an electric vehicle. So if you want to predict how charging infrastructure affects vehicle sales, it's actually fairly complicated. And we're just beginning to do it right. So here's one output from our study. And this says, what if there's no home charging? You don't have home charging. And you have 150 kilowatt chargers only. Those are fast chargers, the level 3 chargers. And you have a vehicle with a 250 mile range, which is about the normal range of a battery electric vehicle sold today. Okay. And we took a sample from the California and the US Household Transportation Service, Household Travel Service. And our total sample of vehicles, their total travel is represented by this dotted red line. So if you were able to accomplish all the trips these households wants to accomplish, you'd get to something over 3 million vehicle miles. These are daily trips. Okay, so we start deploying DC fast chargers, and the amount of travel that people can accomplish goes up, but only reaches about 50% of what they would normally do. And part of that reason is that in these studies, we don't allow people to change their behavior. You're going to do what you would have done with your ICE, which means if you're going to drive 100 miles in your ICE, or let's say 150 miles in your ICE, and not stop, okay, you would not be able to do it in this situation. You wouldn't be able to accomplish that trip. But if you stopped for an hour, okay, maybe then you could. Okay, so because we're not saying, well, if the person has a battery electric vehicle, they're not going to drive the same way, or they would drive when they had an ICE, they're going to make an extra stop and recharge. We don't do that. Okay. So the first thing is, without a home charger, even if we have widespread availability of DC fast charger, unless you change your behavior, you can't accomplish only about 50% of your trips.
David, has anybody done a longitudinal study? Can't see my mouth. That tracks how somebody changes their behavior or not from going from ICE to battery electric?
Yeah, to my knowledge, there's no large-scale study like that. So we don't really know, and we don't have a model for predicting that. But I think you could predict it even without actual data. In other words, just sort of, okay, what is it going to cost you? How much trouble is it to stop? And would a normal person be willing to do that? In fact, that's the way we approach this problem. Okay, so this is okay, no miles achieved, but about 50% of miles if you had widespread. Now we say, okay, here you don't have home charging, but you have charging at work. That gets you a substantial amount more, but then all the increase essentially comes from DC fast charging. It's still almost all your trips you can't do. Now we give you home charging. Automation. And without any DC fast charging at all, bang, you get 80% of your trips accomplished just because you can charge at home, right? So this is the big one, right? And then furthermore, we say, okay, here's home plus DC fast charging. And DC fast charging increases, but not as fast. But it's still a substantial increase from public DC fast charging. Now I add work to DC fast charging as you get almost nothing. Okay, so what's the benefit of workplace charging? We're going to have this much workplace charging, like the graph said? I don't see it, right? Okay, and there's still trips that can't be accomplished, even with home charging and widespread DC fast charging, but that's mainly, I think, mainly because we don't allow people to change their behavior.
NHTS does not include intercity travel. Oh, it does, I think, the latest version.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've, in our modeling, I'll show you later, we split intercity travel from intra-regional travel, partly because of the data, but also because there's just a difference in the nature of that travel. Okay, so here, coming to that, this is a travel distribution from the National Household Travel Survey. And this dotted line, black dotted line, shows the distribution of trips. Of course, the distribution of miles is different, more skewed because the miles per trip increases the length of the trip. So there are more miles in the longer trips than there are frequency of trips. Even so, you look at the cumulative distribution of miles, within 150 miles, you have about 90% of the trips, right? And so we're making 250, 300 mile vehicles, but 90% of the travel can be accomplished within 150 miles. Okay, but most of the unaccommodated travel we see in our studies is long distance travel. And the question is, how important is long distance travel? Is it really just this important, over 200 miles, 5% or less? Probably not. People seem to attach greater importance to things they do infrequently when they go buy a car. So you know that you're going to drive off-road, or maybe you don't realize it. You're going to drive off-road maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Still, you buy an off-road vehicle and 4-wheel drive. Here in Knoxville, it snows and the roads are really icy maybe once or twice a year. People still want to have all-wheel drive, and they'll pay $1,000 or so for that. And they hardly ever use it. And the capacity of the vehicle, maybe you buy a 7-passenger SUV or minivan, but your grandkids only come and visit you once a year. But you got to have it when they're there. So people will pay a lot more, and in their minds, these things matter a lot to them. So how important are these long trips? Well, that's an area that's not really well studied, and we don't know whether these are outsized importance or not. And in the results I'm going to show later, we value those trips per mile the same amount as local trips, which is probably not the way people see it, but we don't really know that. Okay, so this is a BEV with less than 150 mile range but adding fast charging enables a lot of those long distance trips. This is just looking at the long distance trips, 75 miles or more beyond your home base. Okay, so that's assuming you go and you come back, that's 150 miles. But increases about 30% the amount of miles that could be achieved by those vehicles. Now that's theoretical from those trip and mile frequency distributions. It's not actual. Another source of data we have is vehicles that are instrumented with GIS and tracked over 6 to 18 months. This is much better data because the National Household Travel Survey data is for a week or a day, basically. That's the kind of data you have. And that doesn't really capture how vehicles are used over a longer period of time, over a period of a year. A year might be a good cycle for what people would normally do with their vehicle. And this kind of data captures that. So we have actually where the second by second, where the vehicles were. And so we know if they were stopped for 20 minutes or an hour or 5 hours. And this gives a much more precise answer. So Eric Wood is at NREL and he did the study on which this graph is based. And it shows still that there's a substantial amount of increased travel, long distance travel available that can be accomplished with deploying DC fast chargers. Now, the other thing is that there's a certain amount of substitutability between vehicle range and public charging infrastructure. So if a vehicle, if you think back to the graph here, if I have 150-mile range, then I can accomplish, well, less than that because I'm not going to run the vehicle down to zero battery, but I can accomplish that many miles. If I have 300-mile range, I can do almost everything, right? So I'll need a lot less public charging infrastructure with vehicles that get 200, 300-mile range than with a vehicle that gets 150 mile range. And this just shows the effect of range on the ability of home charging, home work charging, and public charging to increase the miles that the vehicle can actually travel and satisfy trip demands. So if you have a 100-mile range vehicle, then you get a fairly large bump up from adding work, and you get a larger bump up from adding public charging infrastructure. But if you have a 300-mile, you get almost from nothing from adding work and a much smaller incremental benefit in total miles you can travel over a year by adding public fast charging. So the longer the range of the vehicle, the less important the infrastructure. And the more widespread the infrastructure, the less important is range. So there's substitutes. Okay, so range has been increasing a lot. You know, the original Nissan Leaf had like 85-mile range, something like that. Now the Nissan Leaf is having a 230, something like that mile. And this is true all over the world. So this is the range of a typical electric vehicle, battery electric vehicle, increasing. This is kilometers, so not miles. But that's about 200 and somebody help me, 220 miles or something like that. Yeah, so with that, that's going to make infrastructure less important. But that kind of makes sense. If the infrastructure is not there and you want someone to buy an electric vehicle, you've got to put a lot of range in. That was Tesla, one of Tesla's brilliant ideas. The other one was, we're going to sell this to rich people. On the other hand, as we deploy this infrastructure and it's all out there, then maybe not everybody needs that. And maybe we go to selling shorter range electric vehicles with expandable battery capacity. So you buy something that has 150-mile range. And if later on you decide you need another 100 miles, you pay, let's see, what am I saying? The batteries are going to cost $75 a kilowatt hour. You want to buy another 30 kilowatt hours, so you're going to spend another $2,000 something dollars. Another factor that I didn't mention earlier is that you can charge faster and faster and faster. This is the power supplied in kilowatts. But not every vehicle can accept that. The vehicle has to be designed to accept a faster charge. So this is going to be a tricky thing going forward for infrastructure, because if you bought a Nissan Leaf 10 years ago, you cannot use a DC fast charge because your vehicle can't handle it. And if they go to 480 kilowatt hour fast chargers, level 4 fast chargers, my Kia Niro can't do that. Okay, so there's another variable in the equation, basically, which is what kind of vehicles and what kind of capability and what kind of fast chargers do you want to put out? Putting out fast chargers that are obsolete or ahead of the game. Okay, so knowing how much adding different kinds of infrastructure can increase or enable more trips to be satisfied, more miles to be traveled, knowing the value of additional miles, which can be reasonably estimated. We estimate it partly from studies of the value of increased range, because the two are substitutes. So if I'm willing to pay more for range, that's equivalent to paying more for accomplishing more miles. I can take that and apply that to infrastructure. And also just sort of sanity check. So how much does it cost you to drive a mile? If it costs you 50 cents to drive your car a mile, the mile must be worth more than 50 cents to you. Okay, so we could, in that way. And I won't try to explain this equation, but basically we have a part that has to do with enabled miles. We have a unreasonably complicated part that has to do with how much time does it take you to charge your vehicle. And so we try to take all those things into account. And we value the enabled miles. So this is based on infrastructure enabling more miles as well as range enabling more miles. And what is it worth for intra-regional travel? This is just the travel within your region. Basically, yeah, okay. So increasing range, increasing station DC fast charging availability. And the striking thing, a couple of things striking about this. Yes, even a vehicle with a 300-mile range would find that full charger availability is worth about $2,000 present value per vehicle. You can see how we plug this into a choice model, right? And but the thing is that it's worth a lot more if you have a short range, right, vehicle, because then it's worth thousands of 3-4 times as much to have a charging network. And this is interregional travel. And you can see that now this is a very strong relationship between range and value, right? So less than $1,000 of value for 100% for your long distance intercity trips, less than $1,000 if you have a 250-mile range car. I don't think that's right, actually, because I'm thinking that people overvalue their longer trips. I mean, let me put it that way. I'm not saying they overvalue. I'm saying that the value that they attach to their longer trips per mile is greater than the value they attach to their local trips per mile when they go to buy a car. Okay. So I think this is not exactly right, but this is what we came up with. So there's a tremendous amount of value in charging infrastructure for vehicles with a short range, but not so much for vehicles with a longer range, although I think it's more than we show. That's what I'd say. Okay. So what's left to figure out here? A lot. So if we're thinking about vehicle choice modeling, the key problem when we linked our vehicle choice model, which was one developed by National Renewable Energy Laboratory. The key problem with the vehicle choice model was it didn't include the positive feedbacks. So the more electric vehicles we sell, the more profitable the infrastructure. The more electric vehicles we sell, the more people become familiar with electric vehicles and understand electric vehicles. That's a big barrier that often gets ignored. Then there's scale economies and learning by doing. One thing the model does try to do is create diversity of choice. So the more electric vehicles are sold, the more makes and models this model will assume is available. But because we don't have those really important feedbacks in there, the model is calibrated to historical sales data. And so there's a constant term for each, alternative specific constant, right? For each make and model of vehicle. And at present, there are very few electric vehicles being sold. So these alternative specific constants are going to be saying, people don't want to buy electric vehicles. They don't like them. When in fact, a lot of that is they don't understand electric vehicles. They're not familiar with them. They don't know how they work. They don't know how they work for them. They think they're risky. Why should I buy one? Resale value is not very good these days because the technology is improving rapidly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the model doesn't include those feedback loops to erode that negative value, okay? So what happens is in that model, you find the value of infrastructure is not so great because you don't have the multiplier effects of positive feedback. That's a big thing in vehicle choice modeling that needs to be overcome.
What's the role of dealers?
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
So what's, market share attributes themselves.
Yeah. So here now I'm giving you my opinion. Today, I think that the people making policy, both in the companies and in the government, think, oh yeah, we can do this. The manufacturers are going to put their marketing people to work trying to sell electric vehicles, and they are, and it's a big deal, and that will help a lot. And the nation is going to extend the subsidies for electric vehicles, and we're going to provide incentives for building infrastructure. This is in the American Jobs Plan and all of that, which I don't know, might have been passed today or not. I don't know. Anyway, I still think they're both missing the problem of innovation diffusion, which has to do with lack of familiarity, lack of understanding, risk aversion, and that sort of thing. And well, John Axon at Simon Fraser University in Canada, I think, has done the most interesting work on what do people understand about electric vehicles. And in his surveys, he's found things like 50% of the public thinks that you have to plug in a hybrid vehicle. And they've been around for 20 years. So the point is, if you go to diffusion theory, if you don't have a compelling private advantage, right? Like this has a compelling private advantage over a landline, right? You don't need to tell people, oh, you gotta really check out cell phones because they're cool, and you'll learn that. There's a compelling private advantage. This has a compelling private advantage over a slide rule. So those things, marketing and everything will enable a really quick increase in market share. What's the compelling private advantage of an electric vehicle? Well, you can charge it at home, and the driving experience is really nice. It's quiet. You get instant torque when you accelerate. It doesn't shift gears, so you don't go. Are these compelling? Well, on the other hand, it takes hours to refill it. not minutes. And so, and the range limitation becomes really important. So there, when you put all of this together, there's no real compelling private advantage that's making everybody say, I just got to have one of these, right? In that case, overcoming the barriers of lack of knowledge and misinformation or misunderstanding and risk aversion is a big deal, I think. And so even though the manufacturers are going to do their best marketing, what people really get their information from when they decide to buy a car or not is a relative, a friend, a neighbor, some trusted source or personal experience, right? So I think it's going to be hard to do. This is my bottom line. Manufacturers being on board and actually trying to sell these vehicles, which they weren't previously, is going to help a lot. The subsidies are crucial. Putting the infrastructure out is crucial. But somebody needs to focus on the problem. I think two problems. One is, how do you get people to really understand this technology and really be confident that yeah, this is going to work? That's really important, especially you want to do this in 8 years. I mean, hybrid vehicles have been around for 20 years, and their market share has now gotten up to 6%. And they're selling for $1,500, and they improve your fuel economy by 50%. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, payback period is like 3-4 years. So why don't we have every vehicle a hybrid vehicle? It's a diffusion problem. They still don't get it. They still don't understand it, as well as some other. Anyway, that's a really long answer to your question. That's a really important question. Yes.
As a normal user, and you don't have a private garage, what would be the next best strategy? Like focusing on like level 4 charger or focusing on like house charger?
Yeah, see, I think this is a really important unsolved problem. And the answer is, I don't really know the next best strategy, but it's something that enables you to say, this is my charger. Even if it's not the same charger, but every day when I come back to my home base with my vehicle, I can charge it. That's what needs to happen. Now, how do you do that? Let's say you live in a house with no off-street parking, okay? Can we put a charger in your front yard? Why not? You know, let's say you live in an apartment building, right? If the apartment building has a parking garage, can we say, if you have an EV, you have this parking space, this is yours, and here's your charger. It's got to be solutions like that that make it possible for you to say, I know I can charge my vehicle. Because you have to go to work every day. You have to go to school every day. Whatever you have to do every day, you have to do it. You can't come home and say, uh-oh, I can't drive to work tomorrow because I can't charge my car. Okay, so that's one thing. Let me build off of that to the question of workplace charging, right? So there's a garage over there, right? Let's say I forgot to charge last night and I didn't realize it. I got in my car and I drove to here and I said, it's 20 miles to Farragut where I live, and I only have 15 miles. What do I want? I'm going to be here for 7 or 8 hours, right? Just give me a plug. That's all I need, because I get 5 miles an hour, right? And I'll get 30 miles, 40 miles out of a wall socket. That's all I need for workplace charging. I don't need to be able to put 100, 200 miles in my car. So these are the kinds of questions we haven't figured out yet, right? Should we be building a lot of level 2 chargers and putting them in public spaces so that someone like me could say, oh, well, there's not a charger in my garage, but if I go park over here in this public parking lot, I can plug in at level 2. Is that what I'm going to do? Am I going to pay for that? Okay, so you know, there's still these problems of how do you design the system, the charging system, to efficiently satisfy people's needs. And I think the two takeaways from our studies are, it's home charging, number one. Home charging. You want people to buy BEVs? They need, it doesn't have to be home because they may not own a home. They need a home-based charging, okay? Someplace that's mine where I can charge it, my charger. I don't have to own it, whatever, I just have to control it. Control the space, control the charger. Okay, the other thing is, other than that, it seems to me it's DC fast charging. Because if I'm out and about doing things or whatever, I don't want to spend an hour, I want to spend 10 minutes charging or as little as possible. And finally, if it's an emergency and I'm at work, just give me an electrical outlet, that's all. I think, this is my
Is
opinion.
there a, so in China, for electric bikes, two-wheelers, it's low tech. I mean, it's a room like this with power extension cords all along the wall. You pull up and plug in and you get your low speed charge.
Yeah,
I've never heard of that solution for cars.
yeah, that's right. And why not? I don't like.
Yeah, I see, there's they have car up on Perkins. Charging up during the day, they get there, 20, 30 miles.
You know, with my previous electric car, which was an i3 and 115 miles range, I did that once. I came to work and I said, uh-oh, I have just about enough electricity to get home, right? And I park in the White Street garage. There's no outlet in the White Street garage, nothing. So I drove to the Baker Center parking lot and I ran a long extension cord. And that was more than enough, right? And then I realized, what do people need charging at work for? They just need a plug. Unless you live 100 miles from your work, in which case you have a different problem. But I think that. So anyway, I love the questions better than talking. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. But the other things, you know, I think there are these other issues we still need to address in figuring out how to really answer this question. And my feeling is at some point, somebody, maybe it's the Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration, needs to say, we got to get organized here. Okay. Not only do we need to put these chargers out there, we have to keep them working. And they have to be in the right places and the right kind of chargers. And how are we going to do that? We don't need to pay for them all necessarily. We don't need to operate them all. We don't need to mandate people you do this, you do this, you do this. But we have to create a system that will enable people with a battery electric vehicle to go anywhere they want to go. And my thinking is it's going to end up something like the interstate highway system or the federal aid highway system, where there are enough incentives and standards to make it work without having the federal government to build every highway and pave every highway and locate every highway and tell everybody what to do. That's my thinking. There's a lot more to be done, but remember, it's great to be a volunteer Zeb.
So, David, one quick question. Like you said that the value of outside charging, it seems, is very low when you consider home charging, relatively speaking. That's what I understood.
Yeah.
And so why should federal government invest in all this infrastructure anyways? If we, you know, I mean, all it does is increase the range a little bit, and it's very inconvenient.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. And here's my answer to the question. The first part of it is what I said earlier. I think people will overvalue
Yeah.
these long distance trips when they go to buy a car. And the second part of it is, for those who are familiar with vehicle choice modeling, right? The elasticity of choice, the price elasticity of choice, and I'll come back to that in a second, between buy a car, don't buy a car, right? Buy, no buy option is fairly low. It's inelastic. It's like minus 0.6 or minus 0.8 or something like that. The price elasticity between buy this car or that car, which are almost the same, is very high. It's like 4, 5, 6 price elasticity. So if I'm looking at two cars, one is the battery electric Kia Niro, and the other one is the internal combustion engine Kia Niro, and let's say they're priced the same, and this one I can, it's done. You're not going to buy that one. You're going to buy that one, even though you do it once a year, because your sensitivity of choice is very high between those two. So that's the problem, I think, is that we have to there has to be this charging network. And the problem is, it's a very difficult problem, and it's different from what we're used to. So you have a gasoline internal combustion engine car. You don't have any gasoline at home to put in it. You have to go to the gas station and buy gasoline. You have an electric car. You don't have to go to the gas station. You can charge it at home. So there are many fewer trips going to be fueled by fast charging infrastructure. So this makes it hard. What's the business model, right? That's a big question. What's the long-term viable business model? I mean, I sort of suggested that once you get the utilization up, to have utilization, but we don't want queuing. We don't want congestion. We don't want you to get to Cookeville and find that both of the plugs are occupied. I think there's 4 plugs, maybe I'm wrong. They're all occupied. And not only that, they're at the Sam's Club where they should be at the Starbucks, but never mind that. So,
Great pizza.
huh?
You can just sit there and eat pizza.
At Sam's Club?
Yeah.
In the Sam's Club parking lot. Yeah. I mean, you can do that. It's a strange thing. It's on the Sam's Club, which is on the south side of the interstate. There's nothing there on the south side. Everything is on the north side. So anyway, I don't know if you've ever been to Cookeville, but anyway. But the point is, these are tough and new problems, I think. And although I think that, the electric